Coming up, hundreds of evacuees finally leave the coronavirus-hit cruise ship docked in Japan, but the ordeal is far from over. Presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg savaged by his rivals as Democrats battle as to who's going to take on Donald Trump. And the Australian vets who used radical new surgery to save an endangered Indonesian sun bear. Well, it's been a harrowing time for passengers of the Diamond Princess cruise ship docked in Japan. Japanese authorities have been holding the ship under quarantine. More than 600 passengers and crew tested positive for the coronavirus, and the first deaths have been reported. Over the past week, many countries have evacuated their citizens from the ship. But for those already infected, there's no easy way home. Our North Asia correspondent Jake Sturmer is in Yokohama and spoke to an Australian couple facing a heart-wrenching situation.
As busload after busload of people left the ship, Queenslanders Paul and Coralie Williamson got the news they'd been dreading. Paul had tested positive for the coronavirus.
Can you see my eyes? They're very small because I've been crying.
I'm sorry to hear that. Are you okay? How are you going, Coralie?
No, she's not going too well actually. But we'll just take a step at a time and we'll go from there.
I'm an emotional girl. Highs, lows.
This latest news has definitely been a low. After 2 weeks quarantined together in this cabin, now they'll be forced to split up. Paul isn't showing symptoms and by this morning still hadn't been taken off the ship.
This is the final day, we assume. Been here a lot longer than we absolutely expected.
Coralie will take the Australian government's evacuation flight to Darwin and Paul will go to hospital somewhere in Japan.
I've got my bag ready for departure to the hospital at some stage today.
The 14 days quarantine for those on board finished today, but there are doubts as to how effective it's been.
This was much more preferable, obviously, at the time than necessarily having everyone disperse around the world. But obviously the situation on the ground has changed and clearly there's been more transmission than expected on the ship.
500 passengers aged 70 or over who tested negative were allowed off. The rest will be released over the next few days. But there are still questions about how and when all remaining passengers will be able to go home. Jake Sturmer, ABC News, Yokohama.
China has expelled an Australian journalist and 2 colleagues who work at the Wall Street Journal over a headline on an opinion piece about the coronavirus outbreak that Beijing deemed racist. China's government has now revoked press credentials for 4 Wall Street Journal reporters in the past year. Here's our China correspondent Bill Birtles.
Forget the trade war, this is the media war. China's foreign ministry announcing that not 1, not 2, but 3 Wall Street Journal reporters will have their press credentials revoked. Among them, Australian Phil Wen. He previously was the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age China bureau chief, and he wrote some groundbreaking stories about Chinese government interference in Australia. More recently for the Journal, he collaborated on an investigation that revealed Chinese leader Xi Jinping's cousin had gambled tens of millions of dollars through Melbourne's Crown Casino. The colleague who he shared that byline with was kicked out by China's government last year, so it's not surprising Phil was the only non-American to be targeted in this latest move. Now, why did China's government do this? Well, supposedly a racist headline. A few weeks ago, the Journal published an opinion piece by an American think tank author that was titled "The Real Sick Man of Asia." This term carries a lot of historical baggage in China and brings up memories of colonial oppression. For weeks, China's government has demanded that the Journal apologise and now has kicked out these 3 reporters who had nothing to do with the opinion piece. It's highly likely there is another reason for this move. It came a day after the US government designated 5 Chinese state media outlets as foreign entities, basically giving them the same designation as an embassy. Now, everybody knows that Chinese state media is controlled by the Chinese government, but it appears Beijing is not happy about the White House publicly saying so.
One of the world's richest men, Michael Bloomberg, has been savaged by his rivals after surging into contention for the Democratic Party's nomination to take on Donald Trump at November's election. The billionaire appeared in his first nationally televised debate, claiming he's the only person with the resources to boot the polarising US president out of the White House. Our North America correspondent James Glenday.
The Democratic Party's many debates have often resembled a reality TV show. Over the past 8 months, unpopular candidates have steadily been booted off stage. And today, a surprise intruder worth more money than almost anyone else on the planet was suddenly thrust into the mix.
And I'm spending that money to get rid of Donald Trump, the worst president we have ever had. And if I can get that done, it will be a great contribution to America and to my kids.
Michael Bloomberg's appearance made this debate a political version of Survivor. He was furiously attacked from all sides over his record on race relations.
I've sat, I've apologized, I've asked for forgiveness.
And stumbled badly after being criticised for alleged comments about women.
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg.
The billionaire got on stage thanks to an unprecedented $600 million TV advertising blitz, which has seen him soar from the back of the pack to as high as second in the polls.
Mike Bloomberg for president.
He made his vast fortune through a financial information and media company, was New York's mayor for 12 years as a Republican, then an independent, and since leaving office has donated enormous sums of money to push climate change policies and encourage gun control.
But in this White House race, previous positions and even policy are playing a very small role. Most Democratic voters are simply desperate to endorse anyone who can defeat Donald Trump.
All left this arena bloodied and bruised, though a 78-year-old senator remains the man to beat.
Bernie Sanders is more than able to deal with the stress and the vigor of being president of the United States.
Donald Trump will again probably be pleased. It's going to take a lot to bring the Democrats back together, no matter who eventually wins the party's nomination. James Glenday, ABC News, Washington.
And one of Donald Trump's closest allies, Roger Stone, has been sentenced to more than 3 years in prison for witness tampering and lying to Congress. The president's unrelenting defence of his longtime confidant has led to a mini revolt inside the Justice Department amid claims Mr Trump has interfered in the case. North America correspondent Catherine Diss reports from Washington.
For a period of around 3 hours, the judge laid out her reasons for handing down her sentence. She spoke about the importance of the case and also the ramifications of Roger Stone's actions and how they related to national security. She spoke about how the House Intelligence Committee investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election campaign was completely warranted, and that Mr Stone's actions had attempted to lie, impede and obstruct the investigation simply to corrupt the result. In handing down her sentence today, she said she took into consideration his age of 67 years and also the fact that he had no prior criminal record when deciding to give him 3 years and 4 months in prison. Now, of course, this is much less than the Department of Justice had originally recommended, which was a sentence of between 7 and 9 years. But of course, that recommendation was thrown into disarray last week after the department decided to withdraw that recommendation following a tweet from the President Donald Trump in which he said that any sort of prison sentence would be unfair, and that of course led to the resignation of the 4 prosecutors on this case.
The Boy Scouts of America has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy amid a flood of sex abuse claims within the non-profit organisation. There are allegations spanning back decades involving thousands of perpetrators. Here's Yvonne Young.
Scouting opens up a lot of opportunities.
The Boy Scouts of America was already struggling with declining membership and controversy over admitting gay and female members. Now it's in financial strife, partly due to a slew of claims over child sex abuse within the organisation. It's filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Paul Moniz, who represents hundreds of men who claim they were abused as scouts, says
the bankruptcy is being filed as a result of decades of concealing abuse by the Boy Scouts and their adult leaders.
The organisation, which reportedly has 2.4 million youth participants, says it sincerely apologises to anyone harmed and encourages victims to come forward. It's also stressed that it will continue to keep operating during the financial restructuring.
We can live up to our social and moral responsibility to fairly compensate victims while also ensuring that we carry out our mission to serve youth, families and local communities through our programs.
A similar bankruptcy strategy to resolve sex abuse lawsuits has been used by more than 20 Catholic dioceses and USA Gymnastics. But it's not clear how much of an overhaul it will bring to the 110-year-old Boy Scouts and if it will guarantee its survival. Yvonne Yong, ABC News.
An Australian delegation has expressed concern about the health of Julian Assange after visiting him in a London prison. They're calling for Assange to be freed as the WikiLeaks founder prepares for his extradition hearing next week. He's wanted in the US to face 18 charges, including espionage, which carry a maximum sentence of 175 years in prison. Here's our Europe correspondent, Samantha Hawley.
An unlikely picture of unity. Political difference fell away as the Australian MPs emerged from Belmarsh prison with a message.
Enough is enough. Leave our bloke alone and let him come home.
They spent 90 minutes with Assange, his mental health their greatest concern.
I said, I don't mean to be flippant, but how are you doing? And his words were immediately not good.
I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, but it was obviously that there's a man who is under enormous pressure. Clearly his health and mental health has deteriorated.
Next week marks the beginning of the next phase for Assange, but it's by no means the end.
The extradition starting on Monday is likely to last a number of years.
That takes into account the appeals process, and even if he wins, he could still end up in the US.
He could still face extradition from any number of other countries. It just protects him from extradition from this country.
His lawyers say Assange is still receiving consular assistance, but demand the Australian government does more.
There's set to be quite the frenzy outside this court next week because this case will gain huge international attention. Julian Assange will sit in the court on a daily basis, but his legal team won't say yet whether he'll testify.
I sense he feels betrayed by the Australian government, by the British government, by the US government. And I actually think he's holding it together remarkably well. I think he's a man of a lot of inner strength.
But he'll need more than that if he's to escape the grasp of the US government. Samantha Hawley, ABC News, London.
Parts of the UK have been battered by severe storms for the second time in a week. Storm Dennis saw some areas receive a month's worth of rain in just 48 hours, inundating homes and businesses. Here's Andrea Nierhoff.
Taking windswept to a new level.
Oh my God, look at it!
This pilot thankfully managing to get his plane on the ground just. Scenes like this were repeated across the UK as the full force of Storm Dennis hit, leaving streets looking more like rivers and boats the only mode of transport. Authorities saying at one point there were almost 600 flood warnings and alerts, the highest number ever recorded. Among them, a rare red warning for life-threatening flooding issued in South Wales.
I'll try and keep a level head, keep a sense of humour, you know, and you can only do what you can do. At the end of the day, nature will just do what it's going to do.
Cars stood little chance against the rushing water. However, some tried to push through, though many had no choice but to wait to be rescued. Despite best efforts, in some areas the water was simply unstoppable. A man in his 60s died after falling into a river in South Wales, while another 2 men lost their lives off England's southeastern coast. Water levels are expected to peak within the coming days, though the recovery is sure to take much longer. Questions have been raised around preparedness, with the government asserting it's done all it can to preempt such extreme weather events.
Concerned with the climate emergency, it's going to bring stormier, wetter winters like the likes we're seeing at the moment.
Cold comfort for these residents. Andrea Nierhoff, ABC News.
In the US, many people have closely watched the rape trial of Harvey Weinstein, which has become a flashpoint of the Me Too movement. Rowena Chu isn't involved in the trial, but she was Weinstein's personal assistant back in 1998 and accuses the former movie producer of trying to rape her. Weinstein has always maintained his innocence. She's now breaking a non-disclosure agreement she signed 20 years ago and has spoken to the ABC's Michael Vincent.
My name is Rowena Chu. I am a Harvey Weinstein survivor and a Me Too advocate.
22 years ago, she was Harvey Weinstein's personal assistant.
And Harvey Weinstein was the Hollywood producer who really made people's dreams come true. Not just actresses and film directors and writers, but also the people in his office. Typically, you know, it's like working for God.
During the Venice Film Festival in 1998, while working with Weinstein in his hotel room office, she alleges he tried to rape her.
So in '98, I was 24 years old and I'd graduated from Oxford for about a couple of years. It's important to highlight that we were working. This wasn't social time. So, you know, there would definitely be conversations that I would start to get uncomfortable about. On top of that, physically, he was usually naked. Either utterly naked or just covered with a robe. Because again, this was sort of part of the Harvey Weinstein intimidation strategy. So I remember being held down to the bed and saying, I've got to go. You know, I mean, this sounds ridiculous in retrospect, but being held down to the bed and saying, I've got to go, I've got to go.
Weinstein has denied this accusation. Rowena Chu went straight to the room of Weinstein's other assistant, Zelda Perkins.
There was no question I was greatly afraid. I mean, she describes me as white and shaking, but I was afraid for many different reasons. I was afraid for my job. I was afraid I'd never work in film again. I was afraid that I couldn't handle Harvey. I was afraid that she would be angry with me and fire me. And instead, she, of course, was incredibly compassionate, but not just compassionate about my situation, angry with Harvey.
They sought advice from senior staff at Weinstein's production company, Miramax.
So our full intention was to tell the police when we got to London. But as soon as we started talking about it internally to Miramax, to people older than us, people were immediately, well, who would believe you?
This is a copy of a non-disclosure agreement, or NDA, signed by Rowena Chu and Zelda Perkins.
It's really clear what their agenda is, and that is to shut us down as completely and as quickly as possible.
It included the threat of legal action if she ever told her story to a medical professional, psychologist, or even her family.
I think once I left Miramax and left the film industry, and sort of came to terms with it myself in terms of I can't go and see a therapist.
I understand the persistence, the cajoling.
Rowena Chu kept her silence for 20 years. She decided to defy the gag order after other women went public with their accusations against Weinstein.
So I like to think of the Me Too movement as something that is bigger than just one man and the fate of what happens to one man. I hope that we as women will continue to speak out, will continue to support one another, and more importantly than even whether Harvey ends up in jail, is the question of, will these types of crimes continued to be perpetrated on young women who enter the workforce today, whether it's Hollywood or somewhere else, or can we find ways to stop this, to stem the tide, to change the law, and to give those young women justice?
Well, Papua New Guinea Defence Force personnel are leaving the Victorian town of Omeo after helping clear debris from roads in the wake of this summer's bushfire crisis. PNG sent almost 100 Defence Force members, who were mostly engineers, to help clean up bushfire-affected areas in East Gippsland. Reporter Hilda Wayne from the ABC's Tok Pisin team and producer Rachel Lucas were in Omeo.
It's a classic PNG dish. Sweet potato and taro cooked on hot stones are being served alongside roast pork cooked over a pit.
Everyone will definitely enjoy it, and you will never forget us.
Soldiers from PNG have spent weeks clearing roads and shoring up containment lines here in Omeo. And here they're being treated to a traditional feast organised by members of Melbourne's Papua New Guinean community.
We are so proud of what they've done. It's a really good thing. You know, Papua New Guinea is a small country. The only thing we can do was to help.
Australian officials say their work has been essential. They've helped to reconnect isolated communities with schools and services after the blazes ripped through East Gippsland.
We can't thank especially the Papua New Guinean Defence Force enough. That is a partnership, not a big brother. It's a true sibling partnership.
The soldiers also took time to meet members of the community, and they also built a memorial at the school in the nearby town of Swifts Creek.
And I think one of the joys that the locals have liked the most is the fact that in the evening the soldiers often do their devotions or sing several hymns, and people find it really beautiful to listen to and really relaxing.
Papua New Guinea is no stranger to natural disasters. Tsunamis, earthquakes, floods and volcanic eruptions are not uncommon, and Australia is often the first to offer help.
Taking part in this operation, especially assisting the Australian community, is like a sort of appreciation, showing that, you know, at least giving back something, you know, not big but small in whatever way we can.
With their mission accomplished, the soldiers are now preparing to head home. And the first thing they're going to do when they get there?
Have a beer.
Hilda Wayne, ABC News.
The sun bear lives in forests across Southeast Asia and is highly sought after in the illegal animal trade. They're often plucked from the wild to be kept as pets. When 3 Australian vets heard about the plight of a 6-year-old sun bear captured by poachers in Indonesia, they banded together to perform radical world-first surgery. The story from reporter Xanthi Kleinig.
My name's Larry Vogelnest. I'm the senior veterinarian here at Taronga Zoo, and recently I travelled to Kalimantan, which is the Bornean part of Indonesia, to assist with a surgical procedure on a little sun bear. A team of us went over in mid-September and performed what was quite an incredible and very difficult procedure.
Okay, so this is Hitam.
Oh, right. God, she is tiny, isn't she? Look at the poor thing. Hitam was taken out of the wild as a cub. Her mother was killed in front of her, and poachers then cut her teeth down and sold her to an Indonesian family where she was kept as a pet. The first 5 years of her life were in a cage in a household. She was fed rice and canned milk, which is completely inappropriate for a bear, and as a consequence didn't grow properly. So this little bear has never done a normal poo in her life.
She only weighed 19 kilos, and that's very small for her age. She's 6 years old, or estimated to be about 6 years of age, and a 6-year-old Bornean sun bear should be really about 40-odd kilos.
I knew this bear was in a lot of trouble, and really I think there were only 2 options for her then, to either euthanize her or to do radical surgery.
On the actual morning of the procedure, loaded up the darts, and the guy who does the darting just went off. And we just waited there, and then they delivered a sleeping sun bear.
So it's what we call a triple pelvic osteotomy, so effectively 3 cuts to the pelvis. At the moment, Hitam's space in that area is about 1 centimetre. In a normal sun bear, it's around about 4. We're hoping to open this up to around about 2.5 centimetres.
It's a very complicated surgery, it's a very specialist surgery, and obviously never been done to a sun bear ever, anywhere.
My role essentially was to manage the anaesthesia.
It's very deformed, this pelvis, and so it should be a reasonably straight line. It's not.
It was a very challenging surgery. Took 7 hours actually to do the procedure.
It's a double-edged sword because I want to shift as much bone, but the more bone I shift, the more muscle we have to fight.
It doesn't look a lot when you see the size of the plate, but I can tell you it was a lot of effort.
People were sort of watching us through the glass of the surgery, you know, on and off all day, and wondering what's going on and trying to get the pelvis fixed. Yeah, I think everyone was very relieved, to be honest, that you know, they got to the end of the procedure, and it was successful at least. We'd accomplished the goal of widening her pelvis.
We were relieved that she woke up after such a long anaesthetic. She woke up pretty uneventfully. Then early the next morning we got a photo of her poo.
So she should be overall much happier.
Oh, I'm delighted you came to help.
Thank you.
And I'm sure our vets are too.
Thank you. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
The great news is, yes, she's happy. She's relaxed. She's eating, a vast range of foods that she's never had before, and her coat just looks fantastic. Once she's fully recovered from the surgery, she will be released into a 1-hectare enclosure that's being built now, and she'll be released into there with 3 other bears. They'll be able to climb trees and interact and forage and be bears.
What a gorgeous outcome. Well, sacked Australian rugby international Israel Folau has played his first match for French rugby league team, the Catalan Dragons, under intense scrutiny. The controversial player made the move to France after he was dropped by Rugby Australia over his controversial social media comments. Our Europe correspondent Samantha Hawley joined the 9,000 spectators who went along for Folau's debut match.
It was a Super League debut many didn't want to see. But it couldn't be stopped, nor could Folau. His first touch of the ball, just 6 minutes into play, Israel Folau proved his worth on the field. Time and again, the French team played to his strength with the high ball.
For him to play his first game of rugby league and to come up with that sort of defensive performance really gives us encouragement going forward with him.
Helping his team to a 36-18 victory, Folau started and stayed for the entire 80 minutes, with his wife Maria watching on from the stand. The Catalans Dragons remain unapologetic for the signing.
When I go to sign a player, I'm talking from a football perspective. He will not repeat anything that was said, whether you like that or don't like it, whether you agree with it or don't agree with it. We quite clearly do not agree with it. We've said that, but that's it.
The local fans rolled into the ground to watch the debut and cared little about past indiscretions.
I think it's good for the club and good for rugby league. He speak, he say, you like or not like. Here, it's just for a player.
His debut might be done, but the controversy still lingers, and away from French soil, he'll face far more hostile crowds.
The Wigan Warriors have already said they'll host a pride match when they take on the team in March. A Catalan spokesman denied 2 women in the French crowd had their rainbow flags removed. The Dragons hope, moving forward, Folau's league does the talking. But can he remain silent for the next 12 months? Samantha Hawley, ABC News, Perpignan.
And that is the program. You can head to the ABC's World News page for all the latest international headlines. And do join me on The World weeknights on the ABC News channel. I'm Bev O'Connor. Thanks so much for your company. Bye-bye.